Today we're going to talk about Allen Ginsberg, who's one of America's greatest poets and most shocking poets, too. I'm not sure if that always goes together, but in the case of Allen Ginsberg, it does. Shocking and great. He was a poet who, like the rest of the Beat generation, really wanted to bring poetry and life together. He wanted to, in fact, have no separation between poetry and life. He felt that older poetry was too stuffy and formal and maybe too much intellectual element to it. And what he really wanted to do was to make his life poetry, make his poetry life. And while that sounds simple, in fact, it's really, really difficult and complicated to do. He was great friends with the other Beat generation writers, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and William Burroughs were kind of the three holy gods of the Beat generation. The Beat generation was also amazingly popular. They were able to reach out to a bigger audience, a broader audience, who loved poetry but didn't like to perhaps work through the linguistic games or work through the symbolic references, or even people who had never been to college, people who just liked to read. And in the 1950s, after World War II, many people went to college after being soldiers. But there was still a larger percentage than now who never went to college. They just liked to read good poetry, good novels, good writing. And the Beat generation appealed to those people. He worked all through his life at poetry. He did poetry, he did music, he did all kind of seminars teaching poetry, teaching how poetry and life goes together. And he took the idea of poetry, I think, very, very seriously. And he thought of it as something that really he wanted to spread. He was deeply religious about poetry, but in a good sense of religious, I think. He had a really fascinating life, and I'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the PowerPoint, the photos, lots of photos of his life. And he had many lovers, he had many friends, he traveled to all kind of places. He experimented with drugs, he experimented with meditation and religion. He used everything that he could use to make his poetry better. Music, Buddhist meditation, caffeine, other drugs as well, his love life. He really brought everything into his poetry and tried to break down the wall between his life and his writing. The Beat generation really gives that, I think, to American literature in a really fantastic way. But instead of listening to me, let's switch over to the PowerPoint and get into what Allen Ginsberg is really saying. His words are marvelous, and really he's a kind of writer who doesn't need anybody to speak for him. He really speaks for himself, and that, I think, is something that's very, very special. Allen Ginsberg really can speak for himself, and he needs no great explanation. He's a poet who really pushes the idea of poetry, and he also just has a marvelous way of explaining language and a way of explaining life and feeling, the inner life and the outer life as well. And the quote on the first page, "Follow your inner moonlight, don't hide the madness." What better way to approach poetry and literature, and what better way to really live? I want to start out with some quotes from Allen, which are really marvelous quotes. And I think he captures the essence of how people work, how language works, how life and literature come together and are very, very important to us. First, our heads are round so that thought can change direction. What a great idea. Just this idea of all these thoughts moving around. There's no need to think in a straightforward, simplistic way, but rather our thoughts should bounce around inside our head. Second, I don't think there is any truth. There are only points of view. This, I think, is very challenging to the concepts of most people in the 1950s. They didn't really think about their life as a consumer in middle-class America. They accepted truths too easily. And so I think here Allen Ginsberg is trying to push us to think about our accepting truths too easily. I think, in fact, he probably believes in truth, but he wants us to come at the truth from different points of view. Third, it isn't enough for your heart to break because everybody's heart is broken now. Yeah, beautiful. What else do poets write about, in a way, than broken hearts? What else is literature than broken hearts? Fourth, I learned a world from each one whom I loved. Nice. Every contact with a person is a huge world. It's contact not with just a human being, but with another entire and complete world. Next, poetry is the one place where people can speak their original human mind. It is the outlet for people to say in public what is known in private. Here again is a different way of saying that life and literature come together, that poetry is a kind of tunnel, a kind of channel, a kind of bridge between our true thinking, our true inner mind, and the public world. We often separate those. In Japanese, there's the concept of uchi and soto, which is a powerful concept, right? What's done inside, what's done outside, just seemingly never connects. But Ginsberg wants those two things to be connected, and that's what he says poetry is. To gain your own voice, you have to forget about having it heard. Well, this is pretty good advice, and everybody who's ever given a talk or a presentation knows this is true. And yet, people worry so much about being heard. They worry about what will people think. Ginsberg and the Beat Generation wanted people to get over their fear. He took on many themes and many topics in his years of writing poetry, and he had a lot of different concepts that he wanted to bring out and to confront. And in the 1950s, and I would say even still now, these concepts are often hidden away. They are scary topics and difficult topics, and people don't want to talk about them because it's just too big. But he was concerned about all of these topics, the building up of the military in America, the idea of money and material objects making us happy. He talked about consumerism, the idea of buying and buying and buying. Sexual repression, of course. He wanted people to be liberated and to express themselves freely, express their bodily desire freely, as well as their mental desire too. Conformity, he was definitely against this. He felt that people were becoming too much alike and losing their individuality. Perhaps most Japanese think of America as a very individualized country, but in fact there's a lot of conformity there as well. The pressure to be the same, to go along with what everybody else is doing is also a pressure in American society. Censorship is an important issue. He had many battles with the legal world, and he battled against the censorship of his works, and he battled against the legal imposition putting on his work. This is a very, very important part of his work. Alienation and disconnection. He wanted people to not be alienated, but to connect, right? As he said before, connect the inner and outer worlds. And lastly, he was very definitely a political activist going against conservatism. So these are his major concerns, really. This is what he's really trying to look at. Here we see some images, of course, of Allen Ginsberg at different phases of his career. Obviously, early, mid-50s on the left, and in the 60s he's holding a flower, surely a reference to the Flower Sutra by the Buddha. Bob Dylan was good friends with Allen Ginsberg. They did many videos together. On the right-hand side, of course, we can see his involvement, increasing interest in Buddhism and all of the ideas related to meditation. He had both this pop culture side, right, as we can see with Bob Dylan there, but he also had this marvelous open spirituality which he used to really inform his poetry and his life as well. I love this photo and this quote, "Poets are damned, but see with the eyes of angels." We get a sense of how sharply and intensely he thought and felt and lived. But let's jump into a poem, a really beautiful poem, I think, about love. This is a good way to start into Ginsberg. Ginsberg's really complicated, and his way of using language is very, very deep. But let's jump into this poem because it's a beautiful poem. The weight of the world is love, under the burden of solitude, under the burden of dissatisfaction. The weight we carry is love. Who can deny in dreams it touches the body, in thought constructs a miracle, and imagination anguishes till born, in human looks out of the heart, burning with purity, for the burden of life is love. But we carry the weight wearily, and so must rest in the arms of love at last, must rest in the arms of love. No rest without love, no sleep without dreams of love. Be mad or chill, obsessed with angels or machines, the final wish is love. Cannot be bitter, cannot deny, cannot withhold if denied. The weight is too heavy. Must give for no return as thought is given in solitude, in all the excellence of its excess. The warm bodies shine together in the darkness. The hand moves to the center of the flesh. The skin trembles in happiness, and the soul comes joyful to the eye. Yes, yes, that's what I wanted. I always wanted. I always wanted to return to the body where I was born. Well, this is a marvelous poem, and I don't want to spend too much time with this because I think it's a poem that we can get very easily, very clearly, very passionately. We get a feeling for what he's really trying to say. And this poem is simple in a sense, but the feelings and the ideas and the concepts here are, I think, really, really difficult. To answer the question which he's trying to do here is, as I said before, what is love? Okay, that was a marvelous poem, a poem about love. And it really brings up these fantastic questions, I think. What is love, right? We all want love. We all know it's something good. All we need is love, the Beatles said. And Allen Ginsberg also knew the Beatles, by the way. And yet it's something that we can't think about deeply. It's something that we worry about, but have a hard time understanding. So what is love, right? That's what Allen Ginsberg is asking us. So let's move on to another poem, which is a little bit more complicated poem. And it's a poem called America. And in this poem, Allen Ginsberg really wants to give us a feeling for his relationship to America. I think it connects to the poem we just looked at because Allen Ginsberg is in love with America. It doesn't seem that way because he's complaining about America and he has a love-hate relationship to America. But I think deep down he really loves America. So as you listen to this poem, I'm going to read it for you. I want you to think of a couple of questions, right? Keep these questions in your mind. Write these down now. First, what's your relation to your country? What's your relation to Japan, if that's where you're from, or whatever country you were born in, or perhaps you have two cultural identities? What's your relationship to your country? Because that's what Allen Ginsberg is looking at here. So that's the first question. The second question is, if you wrote a poem to your country, if you wrote a poem called Japan, what would you put in it? What feelings, what thoughts, what images, what emotions would you put inside there? So let me read this poem to you and print out a copy of it. You can read the copy along as I read it, but it's good to hear poetry because poetry is sound. We end up looking and reading poetry on a page, but that's like looking at an animal in a zoo. If we listen to poetry, we'll really get the wild, living emotion of the poetry a lot better. So let me read America by Allen Ginsberg. America, I've given you all, and now I'm nothing. America, $2.27, January 17th, 1956. I can't stand my own mind. America, when will we end the human war? Go fuck yourself with your atom bomb. I don't feel good. Don't bother me. I won't write my poem till I'm in my right mind. America, when will you be angelic? When will you take off your clothes? When will you look at yourself through the grave? When will you be worthy of your million Trotskyites? America, why are your libraries full of tears? America, when will you send your eggs to India? I'm sick of your insane demands. When can I go into the supermarket and buy what I need with my good looks? America, after all, it is you and I who are perfect, not the next world. Your machinery is too much for me. You made me want to be a saint. There must be some other way to settle this argument. Burroughs is in Tangiers. I don't think he'll come back. It's sinister. Are you being sinister, or is this some form of practical joke? I'm trying to come to the point. I refuse to give up my obsession. America, stop pushing. I know what I'm doing. America, the plum blossoms are falling. I haven't read the newspapers for months. Every day somebody goes on trial for murder. America, I feel sentimental about the Wobblies. America, I used to be a communist when I was a kid, and I'm not sorry. I smoke marijuana every chance I get. I sit in my house for days on end and stare at the roses in the closet. When I go to Chinatown, I get drunk and never get laid. My mind is made up. There's going to be trouble. You should have seen me reading Marx. My psychoanalyst thinks I'm perfectly right. I won't say the Lord's Prayer. I have mystical visions and cosmic vibrations. America, I still haven't told you what you did to Uncle Max after he came over from Russia. I'm addressing you. Are you going to let your emotional life be run by Time magazine? I'm obsessed by Time magazine. I read it every week. Its cover stares at me every time I slink past a candy store. I read it in the basement of the Berkeley Public Library. It's always telling me about responsibility. Businessmen are serious. Movie producers are serious. Everybody's serious but me. It occurs to me that I am America. I am talking to myself again. Asia is rising against me. I haven't got a Chinaman's chance. I'd better consider my national resources. My national resources consist of 2 joints of marijuana, millions of genitals, and unpublishable private literature that goes 1,400 miles an hour and 25,000 mental institutions. I say nothing about my prisons, nor the millions of underprivileged who live in my flower pots under the light of 500 suns. I have abolished the whorehouses of France. Tangiers is the next to go. My ambition is to be president, despite the fact that I'm a Catholic. America, how can I write a holy litany in your silly mood? I will continue like Henry Ford. My strophes are as individual as his automobiles. More so, they're all different sexes. America, I will sell you strophes, $2,500 apiece, $500 down on your old strophe. America, free Tom Mooney. America, save the Spanish loyalists. America, Sacco and Vanzetti must not die. America, I am the Scottsboro Boys. America, when I was 7, my mama took me to communist cell meetings. They sold us garbanzos, a handful per ticket. A ticket costs a nickel, and the speeches were free. Everybody was angelic and sentimental about the workers. It was all so sincere. You have no idea what a good thing the party was in 1835. Scott Nearing was a grand old man, a real mensch. Mother Bluer made me cry. I once saw Israel Amter plain. Everybody must have been a spy. America, you don't really want to go to war. America, it's them bad Russians. Them Russians, and them Chinamen, and them Russians. The Russia wants to eat us alive. The Russia's power mad. She wants to take our cars from out our garages. Her wants to grab Chicago. Her needs a Red Reader's Digest. Her wants are auto plants in Siberia. Him big bureaucracy running our filling stations. That no good. Ugh. Him make Indians learn read. Him need big black niggers. Ha! Her make us all work 16 hours a day. Help! America, this is quite serious. America, this is the impression I get from looking at the television set. America, is this correct? I'd better get right down to the job. It's true, I don't want to join the army or turn lathes in precision parts factories. I'm nearsighted and psychopathic anyway. America, I'm putting my queer shoulder to the wheel. That was America, and what a amazing, powerful image that is, set of images, right? He's really talking about the big questions in America. He's asking questions. He's complaining, but he's in love with America too, right? He says he hates Time magazine, but he reads Time magazine. And he talks about the big issues, which are issues for every country, I think. Money, what is the importance of money? Poverty, he talks about. Shopping, he talks about people with no money. The military, he's talking about America's power, the military buildup towards war, and the atomic bomb, which was used and repeatedly, used, of course, in the war against Japan, but used afterwards as a test, right, to scare the world. Bombing Bikini Island, bombing in the Pacific, bombing. He's really criticizing the worst side of America, and he asks these questions, right? He doesn't want to be satisfied just complaining. He wants to think about it. He wants America to be like an angel. He wants America to get naked. He wants America to think about why its libraries are full of tears, the sadness of books, of literature. Right? He goes on to talk about economics. He's talking about supermarkets and selling strophes, right? Strophes are elements of poetry. And he says, you can buy them. I'll give you a return, a discount on your strophe, right? He talks about politics, about Marx and Trotsky, the Wobblies. It's a group that organized for labor freedom in the 1930s, and China and Russia. And he talks about spiritual things too, right? Mystical visions, cosmic vibrations. And he talks about the media, TV, and Time magazine. But the line I like best is he says, I am America. America, is this correct? He's speaking to America. He's addressing America, right? So if you wrote a poem like this to Japan or whatever country you're from, what would your poem include? Would you talk about the economy? Would you talk about people's feeling? Would you talk about the elements of your daily life? What would you talk about? Well, this is what Ginsberg wants to talk about here. Now, let's look at what Ginsberg was writing about. He's writing images and poetry that go against the images of consumer magazines, and he goes against the images that were seen in the everyday life. And I want you to look at the video Howl and to see that, and I'll put a link when we get to the end of this so that you can link over. But you can stop this video right now and go to the link to video of Howl. This is Allen Ginsberg's poem. Howl is a very intense poem, and the video, which is made with various different methods, is quite beautiful, I think, but very scary and frightening too. So you have to be a little bit ready. The poem Howl, the video of the poem, is about 15 minutes long. So if you want to stop now, stop here, watch Howl. And if you want to go forward into the images, go through the images first, and then you can go back and watch the video for Howl and listen. So let's think about which images are truer, the ones in Howl or the ones that we're just about to look at here. These images all come from the world of magazines and newspapers and television. They are images of 1950s America when Allen Ginsberg and the Beat Generation are writing. This is a very famous photo. There's no way like the American way, meaning there's nothing better than the American way of life. It's the world's highest standard of living, but we see people waiting for bread, waiting for food in a line, and of course you'll notice all of those people are African American people. They are not necessarily poor people. Some have a suit and tie, but surely they're waiting for food to be given to them. And the irony of the billboard and the reality of the people below is, I think, what Allen Ginsberg wanted to say. He wanted to say the images that we see on TV and magazines in the 1950s, these are just not true. There's another reality. Here, of course, is my home-ism, the American and his economy, the idea that the happy family is there together, husband and wife, $15,000 house. Everybody's moving from the city to the suburbs, right? Happiness is there for well-dressed white people. This is the cover of Life magazine, one of the most famous magazines at the time. 1950 saw a boom in consumerism. This is a marvelous advertisement. Can you imagine giving babies Coca-Cola? Ugh, how soon is too soon? Oh my God. But this was very much the idea of advertising, the idea of a happy baby, instead of mother's milk, having Coca-Cola. McDonald's, I think everybody knows McDonald's. It's a company that's around the world. This is the original McDonald's, 1955. These golden arches, it was a drive-in. You drove in, you could eat in your car, or go up to the counter, pick up and take out the whatever you ordered, hamburgers, french fries, chocolate milkshake. That was my order always. And you can see over 1 million hamburgers are sold, right? A speedy service system, right? We get a sense of the consumerism and conformity. People wanted their hamburgers the same every time. They didn't want a hamburger dependent on the cook. They wanted a hamburger that tastes exactly the same every time they ordered. 1 million hamburgers, whew, awful. Pledge of Allegiance, belief in America. Most classrooms had to say the Pledge of Allegiance. This was very contentious. Put your hand over your heart. I pledge of allegiance to the flag and to the United States of America, for which it stands, etc., etc. And the Pledge of Allegiance is something that really was trying to get young people to love their country. So very much the same as in Japan, the Kimigayo, singing about the love of country. The Pledge of Allegiance was later taken out of most schools. I don't think it's very common anymore. When I was young, up until, I guess, 6th grade, we had to say the Pledge of Allegiance, depending on the teacher. Some teachers are very strict, some are not. Here's the idea of women, beauty contest, look how beautiful they are, but also the commodification and the objectification of women. The most beautiful woman in Alabama, the most beautiful woman in South Dakota. We see that consumerism and the conservatism is really placing women in a secondary position. The television starts to come into American life, and you can see the kids sitting there like, half a meter away from the screen there, staring at the screen, right? The idea that television was becoming more important than real life, that you could see something and have entertainment in the home, was really something new at the time. And of course, it's a concept that's taken over the world, right? Many people's homes have the TV on constantly. Consumerism became important. Here's beer, beer, beer. You see the women serving on the left. The men are watching. The woman's bringing out the beer as they watch baseball. And of course, beer is part of freedom, right? As it says down below. Beer gives you freedom. Allen Ginsberg and the Beat Generation wanted to show a very, very different idea of this. It did not want to picture women as secondary, as cooking in the kitchen, as stupid. There's a woman crying over her burned meal, and the husband saying, "Don't worry, the beer is fine." Smoking, of course, is very important. Here's a doctor. He's recommending, more doctors recommend Camel cigarettes. And down below, the woman has a T-zone, T for taste, T for throat. We get the idea of how things are marketed. Different marketing strategy here. Beautiful actress Sophia Loren selling Lucky Strike cigarettes. Lucky Strike, of course, has many symbolic meanings. Thrills, cars, right? The idea of actively driving. And this is something I think that the Beat Generation took up. Certainly the novel On the Road, cars are extremely important. Cars, 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 cars. It becomes an obsession, an object of desire, a necessity to have a car. And such a necessity that people moved to the suburbs. The cities were rebuilt, starting to look and be shaped according to the car. The car changed the layout of cities, and of course reduced train travel all through the United States. This advertisement, of course, is a kind of double meaning. Picture yourself in one of these Buick Beauties. That, of course, could refer to the car, or it could refer to the woman. Right? This is the reality, though. What most people took, which is buses. The car is still unaffordable for most people. And you'll see segregated buses, blacks at the back, whites at the front. This was how most buses through the 1950s were in the South. My homeism, buy a home, daddy works, mama stays at home, the kids see him off in the morning. Happy teaching the girl how to draw, how to cook. Women safe inside the kitchen. Of course, women are happy if the house is bought, and here a guy gets a big kiss from the wife. Now, those are the images that we've looked at, and what I want you to do now is just give you a little bit more about the Howl obscenity trial. If you watched the video before, great. Think about the images that we just saw and try to put those together. And if you didn't watch the Howl video yet, let me give you just a little information before you jump in. First, Howl was written in 1955. It was published a year later. The bookstore manager, who was of Japanese origin, Shig was his nickname, Shigeyoshi. He was arrested for selling this as indecent and obscene material. The U.S. Customs, which was in charge of pornography and other obscene materials, arrested the publisher and arrested the bookstore manager and brought them to trial for obscenity. The obscenity, of course, was for using quote-unquote obscene words and quote-unquote obscene images. However, the U.S. Customs, who arrested the publisher and the bookstore manager, didn't win because poets, professors, literary experts, publishers all came to testify, and all of them said that the poem Howl was not obscene. The judge found that the poem had redeeming social value and that it was protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution, which is the right of freedom of expression. So, although it was put on trial, Allen Ginsberg was not put on trial, but the bookstore manager and the publisher was put on trial for this, right? And here's a picture of Shigeyoshi Murao. He was the manager of City Light Bookstore and a very, very good friend of all the poets and writers of the Beat Generation, and certainly of Allen Ginsberg. And I love this quote from him: "Imagine being arrested for selling poetry." What a great comment. What a great idea. Now, we've looked at two poems by Ginsberg, but I really want to look at his masterpiece, which is Howl. And the Howl was made into a film about Allen Ginsberg. The centerpiece, of course, was the poem itself. And it's been edited down and put into a very watchable, listenable form. So I want you to watch that video and read the words. Of course, download the poem and read that as well. It's a very difficult poem to read, but it's a very structured poem, and we'll talk about that in class. First, watch the video of Howl with the words. Secondly, look at some of the videos of the 1950s that you can find on Mashpedia. These videos show the images or the ideal image of what people wanted to believe in the 1950s. What I want you to do then is to contrast the two video images, Howl by Allen Ginsberg and all the other videos about cars and homes and beautiful women that were made in the 1950s. Tell me which one you think is the real America. Have fun.